The morning sun rose over New Pyongyang. Like any other day, Captain Desung stood on the command deck of the colony's defense center, drinking his third cup of coffee. He was a tall man with tired eyes and gray hair at his temples. 20 years in the military had taught him to expect trouble, but he never expected it to arrive in golden ships. The Cry fleet appeared in orbit at 60 hours, 12 massive vessels, each one gleaming like polished metal in the sunlight. They were beautiful in a strange way, all curves and flowing designs, nothing like the blocky human ships that orbited nearby. Captain were receiving a transmission, Lieutenant Hannah said. From her station, she was young, only 25, but her voice never shook. Dow like that about her. Put it through, he ordered. The main screen flickered to life. An alien face appeared. It had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern, smooth blue skin, and a mouth that didn't quite move right when it spoke. The translation came through clearly. Greetings, humans of New Pyongyang. I am Ambassador Velen of the Kawati Empire. We come with an offer of integration into our great society. As is our custom, we shall demonstrate our military superiority through a formal battle. This is standard procedure. Do not be alarmed. Desung felt his jaw tighten. A battle? You're attacking us. Attacking is such a crude word, Velen said, and somehow the translator caught his condescending tone perfectly. This is a demonstration, a ritual. We have studied your species. You are adequate warrior. This will last perhaps 6 hours. When you reach 30% casualties, you will surrender. We will accept. Then we discussed terms of your integration. Very civilized. And if we refuse? Hana asked. Refuse? Vlan seemed confused by the question. That is not how this works. We are offering you a place in the Empire. This is an honor. The transmission cut off before anyone could respond. Desung looked around the command center. 30 officers stared back at him, clears throat. Some looked scared, some looked angry. Private Jin Wu, standing guard by the door, just looked confused. He was barely 20 years old, fresh from training. Sound the alarm, Desau said quietly. Get everyone to battle stations. This is not a drill. The Krathi attacked at dawn. Their ships fired bright blue beams that cut through the air like lightning. The colony shields flared and held, but barely. Desau watched the defense grid light up with warnings. They're landing troops at Sectors 7, 12, and 18, Hannah reported. Infantry supported by walkers, estimated 3,000 ground forces. How many do we have? Desung asked, though he already knew. 800 combat-ready personnel, sir. The math was bad. Everyone knew it, but Desung had been in bad situations before. Deploy all units, standard defensive positions, make them work for every meter. The first hour was chaos. The Karathi soldiers were good. Desung had to admit they moved in perfect formation, their weapons precise and deadly. They were taller than humans, faster, stronger. Their armor absorbed bullets that should have killed them. But they fought strangely, carefully, like they were afraid to take real risks. Private Jin Wu was stationed at Outpost 7 with his squad, 12 soldiers, holding a communications tower against a Cowie advance. He crouched behind a concrete barrier, his rifle hot in his hands, and tried not to think about how scared he was. Contact front, Sergeant Elsung shouted. The Kawati came in a line, their shields shimmering. Jin Wu fired. His bullets sparked off their Armor one Karathi fell, then another. But there were so many a blue beam cut. Through the air, Sergeant Ilsung went. Down, not even screaming, just gone. Fall back, someone yelled, but there was nowhere to fall back to. The Karathi were everywhere. Jinwoo saw Private Sunmen take a hit to the chest. Corporal Jae-ho's head simply disappeared in a flash of blue light. The world became fire and noise and terror. Then Jinwoo was alone. His squad was dead, all of them. He crouched behind his barrier, breathing hard, checking his ammunition. 2 magazines left, maybe 60 rounds. The smart thing would be to run, to hide, to surrender. Jinwoo thought about his sister back on Earth, about his mother who cried when he enlisted, about Sergeant Ilsung who had taught him to shoot. He stood up and started firing. The Karathi seemed surprised. One of them broadcast something in their language, probably asking him to surrender. Jinwoo didn't speak Karathi. He just kept shooting. When his rifle clicked empty, he drew his pistol. When the pistol ran dry, he pulled out his combat knife. A Karathi soldier stopped advancing, clearly confused about why this small human wasn't running. Jin-woo charged. He didn't kill the Karathi. They were too strong, too well armored, but he tried. He stabbed and slashed and fought until they knocked him down. Even then, on the ground with a broken arm, he kept trying to fight. The Karathi squad leader stood over him, weapon pointed at his head. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the alien lowered his weapon and spoke into his communicator. The words translated came through Jinwoo and LT Unk and GT's earpiece. Commander, we have a situation. The human won't stop fighting. He's alone. He's wounded. He's out of ammunition. But he won't stop. What are your instructions? Back in the command center, Desao watched the casualty reports climb. 20% losses, 25%. The Karathi were good at this. They pushed hard, but not too hard. They were managing the battle like a business transaction. At 30% casualties. Right on schedule. Ambassador Velenis' face appeared on the screen again. You have fought adequately, Captain Desung. Your losses are at the acceptable threshold. Broadcast your surrender and we will cease hostilities. You will be integrated into the empire with honor. This is how civilized species conduct warfare. The command center went quiet. Everyone looked at Desao. Hana's face was blank, but her hands were clenched into fists. The junior officers looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Desao thought about Private Jinwoo still fighting alone at Outpost 7. According to the drones, he thought about all the soldiers dying out there. He thought about the Karathis' arrogant face on the screen. He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Surrender, Desao said slowly. Ambassador, I think there's been a cultural misunderstanding. You see, we don't really do that. 30% casualties. That just means we have 70% left to fight with. Vela's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. I do not understand. This is the threshold. This is how warfare is conducted. Maybe for you, Dong said. His smile got wider, but we're human. We're just getting warmed up. He cut the transmission and turned to Hana. Launch the counterattack. All reserves. I want every soldier we have on the field. Show these bastards what humans look like when we stop being polite. Hana smiled for the first time that day. Yes, sir. The Karathi expected the humans to stop fighting, to accept defeat with dignity, to follow The rules, they were about to learn that. Humans didn't have a rule book, they didn't have an off switch, they just had fury and coffee and a deep cultural hatred of being told what to do. The real battle was just beginning. 6 hours into the battle, Commander Kin of the Karathi fleet stood in his command chamber and felt something he had never experienced in 40 years of military service, confusion. The humans should have stopped fighting by now. Every species in the known galaxy followed the 6-hour rule. It was biological law. After 6 hours of combat, soldiers became exhausted. Mistakes happened, unnecessary deaths occurred. Civilized species recognized this and paused to negotiate, but the humans weren't pausing. If anything, they were fighting harder. Status report. Kikian demanded. His tactical officer, a young female named Sil, looked at her screens with all 4 eyes. Commander, the humans have not reduced their combat intensity. Our forces report that human soldiers who should be incapacitated are still fighting. We have multiple confirmed reports of humans fighting with severe injuries that should render them unconscious. That's impossible. Christian said, no species can maintain combat effectiveness after 6 hours. Show me. The screen lit up with battlefield footage. Christian watched a human soldier with a shattered leg drag herself to a mounted gun. She strapped herself into the seat and began firing. When Kawati soldiers tried to flank her position, she didn't retreat. She just kept firing until they had to pull back. Who is that? Kyan asked. According to identification scans, that's Sergeant Boa. She lost her legs an hour or 2 of the battle. She's been in that gun imp placement for 4 hours. She hasn't stopped firing. Commander, she should be in medical care. She should be screaming in pain, but she's just dying. Kyan felt something cold in his chest. What are the human casualties now? 47%. Commander, and their combat effectiveness, so hesitated. It hasn't decreased, sir. If anything, they're fighting with more aggression than before. That was impossible. That violated every known principle of warfare. When soldiers saw their companions fall, when they grew exhausted, when losses mounted, they became cautious. They preserved themselves. That was logical. That was survival instinct. But the humans weren't being logical. Corporal Taeyang was a medic. He had been a medic for 3 years and he was good at his job. His job was to save lives, not take them. But after 6 hours of watching his friends die, after running through enemy fire 17 times to drag wounded soldiers to safety after taking 3 bullets himself, something changed in Taeyang's mind. He was treating a wounded soldier behind a collapsed wall when a cowardly squad surrounded his position. There were 6 of them, all with weapons pointed at him. One of them spoke through a translator. Medic, human, you are wounded. Your position is overrun. Surrender and you will receive medical treatment. Taeyang looked at the wounded soldier he was treating, Private Yang Su, 19 years old, bullet in his stomach. He looked at the Karathi. He looked at the grenade on his belt. You know what? Taeyang said quietly, I'm really tired. He pulled the pin. The Karathi had excellent reflexes. They scattered fast enough that the grenade only killed 2 of them, but Taeyang wasn't trying to kill them all. He was trying to make them afraid. It worked. The surviving Karathi soldiers ran. They ran from a wounded medic who had decided he would rather die than surrender. They reported back to their commander that the humans were insane, that they didn't value their own lives, that they couldn't be captured because they would rather explode than surrender. Lieutenant Hannah hadn't slept in 30 hours. Her eyes burned, her hands shook from too much caffeine and adrenaline. She had watched 300 soldiers die under her command, and she would remember every single face for the rest of her life, but she couldn't stop. Every time she thought about closing her eyes, another alert came through, another position under attack, another squad calling for support. Lieutenant, Sector 9 is requesting artillery support, a junior officer said. Hannah pulled up the tactical map. Sector 9, friendly forces were danger close to enemy positions. The shot would be difficult. In training, she would have taken 5 minutes to calculate it perfectly. But this wasn't training, and she didn't have 5 minutes. She ran the numbers. Her head factored in wind and distance and the curve of the planet, and gave the order, fire. Mission approved. Coordinates loaded. Fire. The artillery roared. 3 seconds later, reports came back. Direct hit. Enemy forces destroyed. Friendly safe. Good shot, Lieutenant, Captain DeSung said from across the command center. Hannah nodded and immediately moved to the next crisis. There was always a next crisis. She would sleep when the battle was over. Maybe the Kauthi tried to withdraw at the 6-hour mark. It was their legal right under the conventions of warfare. Both sides paused after 6 hours to rest and negotiate. That was the law. That was how civilized species behaved. They broadcast their intention to withdraw. They expected the humans to do the same. Instead, the humans attacked a full assault. Every remaining soldier, every tank, every aircraft. The humans hit the withdrawing cry forces like a hammer. Commander Kikian watched in horror as his carefully organized retreat turned into chaos. Krathi soldiers, exhausted from 6 hours of combat, suddenly faced humans who seemed to have endless energy. It wasn't that the humans weren't tired. Footage clearly showed them stumbling, bleeding, barely able to stand, but they kept coming anyway. Why aren't they stopping? Kyan whispered. Nobody had an answer. Private Jin Wu regained consciousness in a crater. His left arm was broken. Something was wrong with his right eye. Everything looked red and blurry. He couldn't remember the last time he ate or drank water. His mouth tasted like blood and dirt. He should have been in a hospital. He should have been evacuated hours ago. Any sane soldier would have stayed in that crater and waited for medical help. Jin Wu checked his pistol. Still had half a magazine. He climbed out of the crater. A Karathi patrol spotted him. 5 soldiers fresh from a ship coming to reinforce the front line. They saw a single human wounded and alone walking toward them. They assumed he was surrendering. They lowered their weapons slightly. Jin Wu started shooting. He hit one before they realized what was happening. The others scattered for cover and returned fire. A beam grazed Jin Wu's shoulder, burning through his armor. He felt the pain distantly, like it was happening to someone else. He ran out of ammunition. He drew his knife. The Kauthi soldier closest to him raised his weapon, ready to end this insane human's life. Then reinforcements arrived. Human reinforcements. A full squad, all of them looking as battered and exhausted as Jin Wu, but they fought like they were fresh from training. They fought like they didn't Know how to stop the Karathi patrol. Fell back, then they ran out. Jin Woo collapsed. A medic reached him, started checking his wounds. You're insane, the medic said. You should be dead. Jin Woo laughed. It hurt. Everything hurt. Yeah. But I'm not. Get me patched up. I'm going back out there. You can barely stand. I can stand enough. The medic looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Crazy bastard. Fine, let me tape you together. By hour 8, the Korathi had suffered 12% casualties. For them, that was catastrophic. Their entire military doctrine was built around minimizing losses. 12% meant something had gone terribly wrong. The humans had suffered 53% casualties, and they were still attacking. Commander Kyan sent an emergency transmission to the Kalrathi. Home world, we need guidance. The humans are not following standard warfare protocols. They do not stop when injured. They do not respect withdrawal protocols. They do not surrender when tactically appropriate. We are not fighting a military force. We are fighting something else entirely. The response came back 3 hours later. Continue the battle. Break their will. All species break eventually. But Captain Desung stood in his command center, running on coffee and rage, and smiled at the reports. The Karathi were pulling back. They were confused. They were scared. Good, let them be scared. Lieutenant Hannah, he said, prepare the next wave. We attack at dawn, sir. We don't have a next wave. We're running on skeleton crews. Then the skeletons will have to do. Hannah smiled. Her eyes were red with exhaustion, but her smile was genuine. Yes, sir. Somewhere in the colony hospital, Sergeant Boa was arguing with doctors who wanted to sedate her. I can still fire a gun, she insisted. I don't need legs to fire a gun. Somewhere in the field, Corporal Taeying was still alive somehow, still treating wounded, still refusing to evacuate. Somewhere in the ruins, Private Jin Woo was taped together with bandages and spite, walking back to the front line. The Kawat he had fought for 6 hours and wanted to rest. The humans had fought for 8 hours and were planning their next attack. The Kawat he were learning a terrible truth. When you fight humans, the battle isn't over when you want it to be over. It's over when the humans say it's over, and the humans hadn't said anything about stopping. Dr. Yuna had been a xenobiologist for 15 years. She had studied 47 different alien species. She understood their biology, their evolution, their psychology. But standing in the medical bay on day 3 of the battle, looking at a captured Kalathi soldier, she realized she understood nothing at all. This doesn't make sense, she muttered. The Kalathi prisoner, a young male named Rio, looked at her with his 4 eyes. He wasn't hostile. He seemed confused more than anything else. What doesn't make sense? He asked through the translator. Yuna said, gesturing at her medical scanner. Your biology, you're incredibly efficient. Your muscles use 40% less energy than human muscles for the same output. Your cardiovascular system is optimized for sustained performance. Your neural pathways process pain differently, reducing shock response. You're built better than us. Yes, Rulin said slowly. My species is quite advanced. Why does this confuse you? Because you stopped fighting after 6 hours. Your body was barely stressed. You could have kept going. Real's eyes widened in horror. Keep fighting after the limit. That would be barbaric. The 6-hour limit exists to prevent unnecessary damage. After 6 hours, the body begins to accumulate stress, efficiency drops. Mistakes happen, death becomes random. Rather than strategic, no civilized species fights past the limit. Yuna looked at him for a long moment. We've been fighting for 3 days. That's impossible. Your soldiers would be dead. A lot of them are dead, but the rest are still fighting. Real shook his head. Then they are insane. There is no tactical reason to continue past exhaustion. It violates every principle of survival. Yuna turned to her assistant, a young man named Dong Hyan. Pull up the scams we took of our own soldiers, the ones who have been in continuous combat. The screens lit up with medical data. Yuna pointed at the readings. Look at this, stress hormones off the charts, muscle damage, micro fractures in bones, sleep deprivation, dehydration, by every medical standard. These soldiers should be incapacitated. Then why aren't they? Don Hyan asked. Yuna pulled up another screen. Brain scans, this right here, the human adrenal system. When we're under extreme stress, our bodies flood with adrenaline and cortisol. It overrides pain. It gives us strength we shouldn't have. It keeps us moving when we should fall down. That sounds inefficient. Real said, your body is damaging itself. Yes, Yuna agreed. It is, but it keeps us alive in the short term. Humans evolved as hunters. We didn't have claws or fangs or speed. What we had was endurance. We could chase prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We're not built to be strong. We're built to keep going. She pulled up historical data. Our species has records of soldiers fighting for weeks without rest. We have documentation of people surviving injuries that should kill them. Through sheer willpower, we have cultures that glorify fighting until death rather than surrendering. Real looked at the data with growing horror. This is a species-wide mental illness. Maybe, Yuna said, or maybe it's just how we survived. In orbit, High Scholar Thelanori had been brought in by the Kawathi Empire to study the situation. He was their foremost expert on warfare, military psychology, and tactical doctrine. He had written 12 books on the subject. He had advised the Empire for 60 years. He watched the battle footage and felt his entire understanding of warfare crumble. Commander Christian, he said slowly, show me the footage again. The one with the soldier with the missing arm. The screen played the footage. Private Jinwoo, now officially missing his left arm from below the elbow, was still fighting. He had tied a tourniquet on the stump. He was firing his rifle one-handed, bracing it against his hip. He wasn't accurate. He wasn't efficient, but he was still fighting. How long has he been in combat? Delanori asked. 72 hours, Scholar. He's been injured 16 times. He's been given medical treatment 8 times, and he's returned to combat immediately after each treatment. Why? Delanori whispered. Why doesn't he stop? We don't know. Theory watched as Jinwoo and LT Unk and GT's position got overrun. The young human fought hand-to-hand with Karathi soldiers. Twice his size. He lost. They beat him down, but even on the ground, half conscious, he was still trying to fight. They don't stop, Felinori said. That's the answer. They simply don't stop. But that's not an answer, Kishin protested. There must be a reason, a tactical advantage, a strategy. No, Felinori said. That's what I'm trying to tell you. There is no strategy. This is their nature. They are persistence hunters. They evolved by chasing prey until it died from exhaustion. They have cultural stories about humans who fought impossible battles. They have words for refusing to give up in dozens of variations. This isn't a tactic, this is what they are. He pulled up more data. Look at this. The Krathi species evolved from ambush predators. We became efficient. We learned to calculate risk versus reward. We developed civilization because we learned when to stop fighting and start negotiating. This made us successful, and the humans evolved from something that never stopped chasing. They became successful despite being weak and slow because they simply never gave up. Their entire psychology is built around persistence. When we reach our limit and stop, they reach their limit and push through it. Christian looked at his tactical displays. 3 days of battle. His forces had suffered 28% casualties. The humans had suffered 71% casualties, and the remaining 29% of humans were still attacking. How do we defeat them? He asked quietly. Theory was silent for a long time. I don't think we can. Not like this. We can kill them, certainly. We have superior numbers and technology. But we cannot break their will because they don't have a breaking point, not one that makes sense to us. Chief Engineer Hyan-Su stood in the colony's reactor control room and laughed at the damage reports. Everything was broken. The shields were at 12%, half the power grid was down. The reactor itself was held together by prayers and very creative engineering. How long can we keep this running? His assistant asked. Honestly, it should have exploded 2 days ago. That's not reassuring, Chief. Hyan-Su shrugged. I stopped worrying about reassuring people around our 20. Now I'm just trying to keep us alive long enough to kill them. An alert blared. A Kalrathi warship was charging its main weapon, targeting the reactor facility directly. One shot would destroy the entire complex and take out half the colony with it. Hyan-Su looked at the controls at the reactor that was barely holding together at the power readings that showed him exactly how unstable everything was. He smiled. You know what? If they want to blow us up, let's blow up together, Chief. What are you doing? Something very stupid, Hyan-Su said. He started typing commands. Override codes. Safety. Snorts. Disengages. Power redirects. Evacuate the reactor level. Everyone out. Now what about you? Someone needs to keep the reactor stable for the next 3 minutes. That's me. Now go. His staff ran. Hyan-Su watched his screens and ran the numbers. The cry ship was charging its weapon. 90 seconds until it fired. The reactor was building to critical mass. He had to time this perfectly. He thought about his daughter studying engineering back on Earth. He hoped she would be proud of this. It was his masterpiece, really, his final exam. The Karathi ship fired. A massive beam of energy lanced down from orbit, aimed at the reactor facility. Dohu hit the final command. The reactor went critical. In a controlled explosion, all that energy directed upward in a tight column. The beam from the Karathi ship met the column of reactor energy in the atmosphere. The collision created a flash of light visible from orbit. When it faded, both the reactor and the Karathi ship were gone. Chief Engineer Hyan-Su died smiling aboard the Kaura flagship. Alarm screamed. A dreadnought class warship, one of their most advanced vessels, had just been destroyed by a human who had turned his own reactor into a weapon. That was Suicide, someone said, no high scholar. Felinori said quietly, that was a human. Showing us what they value. Winning more than they value their own lives. How do you fight that? How do you negotiate with that? Commander Christian sent an emergency message to the Empire's Supreme Council. The message was short. We are not fighting a military. We are fighting a species that doesn't understand losing. Request immediate reinforcements or authorization to withdraw. The humans will not stop. I repeat, the humans do not stop. In the command center, Captain Desung received a report of Heian Su and LT Uncan GT's death. He closed his eyes for a moment, just one moment, then he opened them and looked at the tactical display. Su just took out one of their capital ships. He said to the room, let's make sure he didn't do it for nothing. Lieutenant Hannah, what's our status? Shields down to 9%, ammunition at 40%, personnel at 29%, combat effective. Good. We have shields, bullets, and soldiers. That's all we need, sir. The Kawat here requesting a ceasefire. Young laughed. It was not a happy sound. Tell them they had their chance to stop at 6 hours. Now we fight until we win or until we're all dead. Ask them which one they prefer. The message was sent. The Karathi response came back quickly. You are insane. Desung smiled. Probably, but we're still here and you're running. The Krathi Empire made their fatal mistake on day 14. They decided to escalate. Supreme Nexus, Cormath, sat in the Grand Council chamber and listened to Commander Krishna reports with growing anger. 14 days of continuous battle against a single colony world, and they still hadn't won. This is unacceptable, Hermith declared. We are the Karathi Empire. We have dominated this sector for 3,000 years. We will not be humiliated by primitives. Supreme Nexus, High Scholar the Lenori said carefully, I must advise against further escalation. The humans respond to overwhelming force with increased aggression, not submission. This is contrary to all military psychology, but the data is clear. Then we will use such overwhelming force that aggression becomes irrelevant, Kermith said. He turned to his military advisor. Send the war fleet 500 ships. I want that colony reduced to rubble within a day. Theory felt cold. Supreme Nexus, that is genocide, that is victory. The order was given. 500 Cry warships entered orbit around New Pyongyang. It was a fleet capable of destroying entire civilizations against one damaged colony with 12 defense frigates and orbital platforms barely holding together. It should have been effortless. Captain Des watched the fleet arrive and felt something break inside him, not his spirit, something else, the part that cared about living through this. Lieutenant Hannah, he said quietly, how many ships do we have? Operational, 6 frigates, sir. The rest are too damaged. The orbital platforms are at minimal functionality. And they brought 500. Yes, sir. The command center was silent. Everyone knew the math. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. Desung stood up. He was so tired. He hadn't slept more than a few hours in 2 weeks. His hands shook from too much coffee and too little food, but his voice was steady. All right, he said, we can't win. Everyone here knows that, but we can make them remember us. We can make sure every Karathi who survives this battle wakes up screaming about humans for the rest of their lives. He looked around the room at the exhausted officers who had fought for 14 Days straight, at Lieutenant Hannah, who had stayed at her post the entire time. At the soldiers who should have broken, but hadn't. I'm going to give an order, Desung said. And it's a criminal order. By any sane military standard, I'm ordering all ships to ram enemy vessels. I'm ordering all orbital platforms to overload their reactors. I'm ordering every soldier left alive to take as many of them with us as possible. He paused. Anyone who wants to object, do it now. I won't hold it against you. Nobody spoke. Dot stood up. Sir, I need you to authorize my codes. What codes? The ones that let me override the safety limiters on the orbital cannons. If I'm going to die, I want to take out at least 50 of those ships first. Desung smiled. Authorized. Anybody else want to do something insane? Every hand in the room went up. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for generations. It had no official name. The humans called it the last stand. The Karathi called it the horror. The 6 human frigates held together by patches and prayers launched straight at the Karathi fleet. The Karathi assumed they were retreating. They assumed wrong. The frigate, indomitable, captained by Commander G1, rammed directly into a Karathi battle cruiser at full speed. Both ships exploded. As she died, G1's last transmission was simply worth it. The frigate Defiant did the same, then relentless, then unyielding. The Karathi fleet scattered in confusion. Ships didn't ram other ships. That was suicide. That was insane. That was against every principle of warfare. But humans didn't care about principles anymore. Lieutenant Hannah overloaded every orbital cannon simultaneously. The platforms tore themselves apart from the energy surge, but not before firing. 53 Karathi ships were destroyed in the first salvo. The rest scattered on the ground. What remained of the human forces launched their final attack. They had no support, no air cover, no artillery, just soldiers with rifles and rage. Private Jinwoo, now more scar tissue than skin, led a squad of 20 against a Karathi position held by 300. They knew they couldn't win. They attacked anyway. Sergeant Bo Ra, still strapped into her gun emplacement, fired until her weapon melted. Then she grabbed a rifle, then a pistol, then rocks. Corporal Taeyang, the medic who had survived 14 days of hell, stopped treating wounded and started fighting. He had no training for combat. He fought anyway. In orbit, Admiral Subin arrived with the human reinforcement fleet. She had 50 ships against the Karathi's remaining 400. The smart move would be to negotiate, to try to save what could be saved. Instead, she broadcast a message to the entire fleet. This is Admiral Subin to all human vessels. The colony has fought for 2 weeks against impossible odds. We're not here to save them. We're here to make sure the Karathi never forget what happens when they fight humans. She turned to her second in command. All ships attack formation. Show them what Earth sends to finish fights. The Karathi fleet outnumbered Subin's forces 8-1. The battle should have lasted 20 minutes. It lasted 6 hours. Human ships fought like their colony counterparts. They didn't retreat when damaged. They didn't surrender when surrounded. When they ran out of ammunition, they rammed. When their engines failed, they detonated their reactors in the middle of enemy formations. Major Cao Yuangho led a boarding action that became legendary. He took 40 Special Forces soldiers onto a Krai flagship. The ship had a crew of 2,000. His team lasted 6 hours, 6 hours of room-to-room fighting against impossible odds, 6 hours of refusing to die even when they should have died. When King Ho was finally cornered, down to just himself and 2 others, all of them bleeding from a dozen wounds, he looked at his companions and smiled. Last one, he said. They had placed charges throughout the ship during their assault. Charges the Karathi never found because they were too busy trying to stop the humans who wouldn't die. Kong Ho pressed the detonator. The flagship exploded from within. 3,000. Kawati died instantly, so did 3 humans who refused to quit. Supreme Nexus Cormath watched his fleet die and felt fear for the first time in his long life. They had brought overwhelming force. They had brought their most advanced weapons. They had brought enough firepower to destroy a planet, and the humans were beating them, not winning. They were losing by every metric. Human casualties were catastrophic. The colony was burning. The reinforcement fleet was being torn apart, but they were taking the Kalathi with them. For every human ship destroyed, 3 Kalathi ships died. For every human soldier killed, 10 Kaura fell. They're insane, Karmath whispered. They're all insane. High Scholar Thelanori stood beside him, watching the slaughter. No, Supreme Nexus, they're human. This is what they are. We have records of their history. They have fought wars for decades, centuries. They have documentation of single battles lasting years. They don't stop fighting because they don't know how to stop. Then how do we beat them? We don't, Felinari said simply. We survive them. In the command center on New Pyong, Captain Dasan collapsed. His body had finally given out after 16 days of continuous command. Medics rushed to him. Status, he gasped. Captain, you need medical care. Status first. Lieutenant Hannah knelt beside him. She looked as bad as he felt. We've lost 89% of our forces. The Krathi have lost 63%. They're pulling back. Dunn laughed. It hurt. We won. No, sir, we're dying, but they're running close enough. He closed his eyes, not to die, just to rest. For the first time in 16 days, Captain Disung allowed himself to rest. Across the colony, the remaining human forces did the same. They didn't surrender. They didn't officially cease fighting. They just ran out of energy to continue. Private Jin Wu collapsed in a crater, his rifle still in his hands. Sergeant Boa slumped over her weapon. Corporal Taeyang lay down on the battlefield and stared at the sky. In orbit, Admiral Subbubin's flagship was burning. She evacuated to life pod, still trying to coordinate the battle. Even as her ship died around her, the Kawati fleet jumped away. What remained of it, 213 ships, had survived. The rest were debris. In the Karathi home system, Supreme Nexus Karmath called an emergency session of the Elder Voices Collective, the ancient council that truly ruled the empire. The humans must be stopped, he said. The eldest of the voices, a being so old her name was forgotten, looked at him with ancient eyes. No, young Nexus, the humans must be understood. We attacked them. We started this war, and we have learned a terrible lesson. What lesson? That there are species in this galaxy that value victory more than survival, species that will fight past any rational stopping point, species that make death into a weapon. She gestured at the reports. Look at these humans. Look at what they did. They lost. By every metric they lost, but they hurt us so badly that we cannot afford another victory like this. One, she was right, the Karathi Empire had won the battle, but the cost was unthinkable. 300 ships destroyed, tens of thousands of soldiers dead, and for what? One colony that was now rubble. Recommend we classify humans as apex death world species. The battle for New Pyongyang officially ended on day 47, not because anyone surrendered, but because both sides had simply run out of the ability to continue fighting. Captain Dasun woke up in a hospital bed, every part of his body hurt. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Easy, Captain. A nurse said, you've been unconscious for 3 days. Your body shut down from exhaustion. The battle over. The Karathi have requested peace talks. Dasun stared at the ceiling. Peace talks after 47 days of hell, after watching his colony burn, after losing so many soldiers. Did we win? He asked. The nurse was quiet for a moment. I don't know, sir. We're still here. That's something. Colonel Mi arrived at New Pyongyang 5 days later. She was a diplomat, not a soldier, and she represented Earth's government. Her job was to negotiate peace terms with the Karathi Empire. She expected to be negotiating from a position of weakness. The colony was destroyed, 89% casualties. The remaining 11% were all in medical care. Instead, the Kawati were terrified. Ambassador Velen, who had started this whole mess with his arrogant speech about civilized warfare, met her in a neutral space station. He looked different now. His fore kept darting around nervously. His smooth blue skin seemed paler. Colonel MJI, he said through the translator, we wish to discuss terms. Terms, MJI said calmly. You attacked us. You started this war, and now you want terms. Please understand, Velen said, and there was something like desperation in his voice. We did not know, we did not understand what your species is capable of. We thought the battle would last 6 hours. It lasted 47 days. We thought you would surrender at 30% casualties. You fought at 89% casualties, and then we are afraid, Velen said simply. The Karathi Empire is 3,000 years old. We have never encountered a species like yours. Species that do not stop fighting. Species that value victory more than survival. You terrify us. Menji leaned back in her chair. She had read the reports. She knew what the colony had done, what they had sacrificed, and now the enemy that had attacked them was afraid. Good, she said. You should be afraid. Now let's talk about reparations. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. MJI had expected to beg for peace. Instead, the Karathi offered everything: technology sharing, resource rights, a mutual defense pact, formal recognition of humanity as an equal power. Why are you giving us all this? Mi asked during one session. High Scholar Thilanori, who was leading the Karathi delegation, pulled up a holographic display. It showed battle statistics, casualty rates, engagement data. Because we ran the numbers, he said quietly. We brought 500 ships to destroy one colony. We lost 287 ships. We had overwhelming numerical and technological superiority, and we barely won. He changed the display. It now showed projections. If we fought Earth itself with its full military, we estimate we could win, but we would lose 90% of our fleet. If we fought all human colonies, we would lose completely, and that is if we fight now before you acquire our technology. So this is about Fear this is about survival, Delanori corrected. The core the Empire has survived for 3 millennia by knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. Your species does not follow the same rules. You fight past any rational stopping point. You turn your own deaths into weapons. You do not surrender even when surrender is the logical choice. He looked at MJI with his 4 eyes. We are offering you peace not because we lost, but because we cannot afford to win against you again. MJI accepted the terms. Earth would gain technology, resources, and recognition. The Kawathi would gain something more valuable, the assurance that humans would not come for revenge. Back on New Pyongyang, the survivors were recovering. Private Jin Wu had been promoted to sergeant. He didn't feel like he deserved it. He had just done what everyone else did. He had fought. He visited Sergeant Bayara in the hospital. She was learning to use prosthetic legs. The doctor said she would never serve in combat again. She laughed at them and said she would prove them wrong. You're insane, Jin Wu said. Says the man who charged a Kawathi position with 1 arm and a knife. Bora replied. They laughed. It felt good to laugh. Corporal Taeying had been promoted too. He didn't want the promotion. He just wanted to forget. He had nightmares every night, dreams of friends dying of blood and fire and endless fighting. A therapist told him he had trauma. He told the therapist everyone had trauma. The therapist said that didn't make it better. Taeying supposed that was true, but he went back to work anyway because that's what humans did. They kept going. Lieutenant Hannah had been offered a medal. She refused it, told them to give it to the soldiers who died. They said those soldiers would get medals too, she said. Then give her medal to their families. She stayed at New Pyongyang. Someone had to rebuild. Someone had to remember. She would do both. Captain Desung recovered slowly. The doctor said he would live, but he would never be the same. His body had been pushed past its limits too many times. He had taken years off his life to fight this battle. He didn't regret it. One night he had a visitor, Admiral Subyubin, who had led the reinforcement fleet. She had survived barely. Her flagship had been destroyed, but she had evacuated in time. Captain, she said, sitting beside his bed, I wanted to thank you for what? For holding the line until we got there, for showing the Kawathi what humans are. Desir shook his head. I didn't do anything special. I just didn't quit. Exactly, Subin said. That's what makes us human. We don't quit. The Krathe Empire sent a formal message to all species in the galaxy. It was unprecedented. The Empire had never done anything like this before. The message was simple. To all civilizations, we have engaged in combat with the species designated as humans. We believe them to be primitive. We believe their military to be adequate but unremarkable. We believe they followed standard warfare protocols. We were wrong about everything. The humans do not follow standard protocols. They do not surrender at acceptable casualty thresholds. They do not cease combat after regulatory time periods. They do not value their own survival over victory. We attacked a single human colony with overwhelming force. The colony was destroyed, but at catastrophic cost to our military. The humans fought for 47 days without ceasing. They fought at 89% casualty rates. They turned their own deaths into weapons. They rammed our ships with their ships. They overloaded their reactors to destroy our vessels. They continued fighting past any rational stopping point that we have analyzed. Their biology, they are not significantly stronger or faster than average species. Their technology is adequate but not exceptional. What makes them dangerous is psychological. They do not stop fighting. This is not hyperbole. They literally do not possess the cultural or biological mechanisms that tell them to stop. Formal recommendation: classify humans as apex deathworld species. Do not engage in combat unless absolutely necessary. If combat is unavoidable, understand that humans do not fight to win. They fight until they cannot physically continue, and they will take you with them when they fall. We have sued for peace. We have offered technology and resources. We have done this not because we lost, but because we cannot survive winning against them. Learn from our mistake. The message spread across the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly knew everything they needed to know. Humans were the species that didn't stop fighting. Some species laughed. They thought the Cowathi were exaggerating. They would learn. Some species took note. They marked human space as no-fly zones. They added humans to the list of species not to antagonize. Some species reached out in friendship. If humans were that dangerous, better to have them as allies than enemies. Private Sohayan had survived the battle. She had been at New Pyongyang from the beginning. She had seen everything. She had fought for 47 days straight. She had watched her friends die. She had thought about giving up 1,000 times, but she never did because she was human, and humans didn't quit. After she recovered, they made her an instructor. They wanted her to teach new recruits about combat, about tactics, about warfare. She taught them about something else. On the first day of every class, she told the same story, the story of New Pyong, the story of Captain Desung refusing to surrender, the story of Sergeant Bilra fighting from a gun imp placement after losing her legs, story of Private Jin Wu charging with one arm and a knife. And at the end of every class, she said the same thing. The enemy will be stronger than you. They will be faster. They will have better weapons and better armor. None of that matters, because when they reach their limit, they stop. But we don't. We never stop. That's what makes us human. The recruits listened. They took notes. Snorts. They trained hard. And every single one of them understood. Humans didn't have an off switch. Not in battle, not in war, not in anything. It was their greatest weakness and their greatest strength. Back on New Pyongyang, they built a memorial, a wall, with the names of every soldier who died in the battle. 8,723 names. Captain Desau attended the dedication ceremony. So did Lieutenant Hannah. So did Admiral Su Dashbin. So did Sergeant Jin Wu, Sergeant Bora, and Corporal Taeying.